Duvid here. We are live with the Horde World Championship. Sorry, just getting the link here. We have Mindhunter versus RayHolt. And not much good activity on Horde, so I thought I'd stream it, promote the game a little bit, maybe try to explain some of my chess theories, just make sure the sound is working. The link in chat here. Apologize about the poor streaming start. And so we have the top players in the game vying for a spot to play the person known to be the best in the world, who calls himself Semifinals. We don't necessarily know who. I mean, these people are people around the world who excel at this chess variant. And the current best known player in the world is called Semifinals, and he's won the previous world championship. And the winner of this knockout will have a chance to play Semifinals. And so we're down to 4 people: Mindhunter, RayHolt, Stubenfisch, and Sinamon from various parts of the world. All people very common to Horde. Anyone who's played Horde on Lichess has most likely ran into these players. And maybe we'll get a little idea of some of the top strategy and a little bit of how to look at the difference. So this will be more difficult to explain for a common person and more towards an expert level, these A4 openings, which are basically theoretical just to Horde players. So already, these players both want to win quite badly. Mindhunter is the favorite. He's been quite good at this for a while. RayHolt has improved quite a bit. So like a theory buster of the A4, because a lot of the openings are built around breaking up the A file or the H file. So, or the rook shuffle, which we'll see if we see some rook shuffles here. So, obviously you can't take the rook here. And I don't know how to assess this position here. It might be relatively even. It might, be book somewhat to say. It's very possible that RayHolt or Mindhunter had both been looking at this position literally right before the game started. Considering it's the World Championship, you would assume that these players for Horde might be booked up into 20, 25, 30 moves deep. Unlike regular chess, Horde, because of the duplicative nature of the repetition of positions, that a lot of the white has very few options in what white could do as compared to regular chess, that book could really be 20, 30 moves deep. It's very possible. And you could even look an opening book and, see how many times this position has been reached. So obviously the rook there is trapped on C4. He could immediately sack on D4. Interesting way going about it. Thinning out a hole in the center. So Ray does not have any queenside pawns left. The D file has been thinned down to 2 pawns, and it's pretty unclear. I'll call it relatively even. I'm not sure. I'm predicting Mindhunter is a favorite here, and it's hard. I just popped on to do some commentary. Try to do a little justice to the World Championship, and say it's not like Queen's Gambit. Like in the real world, like guys like Duvid are the only people that are really interested in chess. They might make a movie that's popular, but no, the World Championship and only Duvid is commenting on it. Time is ticked down. RayHolt is under some time pressure. I think Mindhunter is probably going to take this game to a victory. An objective analysis of what actually happened here, saying these are theoretical openings, the A4, that are kind of beyond my pay grade. For Duvid's almost top 50 Horde player. I've gotten quite a few games off of RayHolt, but he's improved But even RayHolt, he's beat me 38.5 to 13.5. Mindhunter, he's beat me 10-0. That game I beat him is at Crazy House, not Horde. So I'm assuming Mindhunter is better in these time crunches. He's also a very fast player, although there's a lot of uncertainty here. So he eventually takes the rook. Now there's a separation. There's a hole in the D file. He still has a bishop also. So can Ray nibble up those pawns? How quickly is G6 going to come? The queen is limited if the queen goes off. So it's a lot of play left in this game. Time control here. These are very complicated positions that is what would separate the top players. So the various strategies, and we're going straight into. It's hard to give a beginner commentary on top level play, but obviously the pawns on the queen side are very slow to advance. And I think that's it. I think RayHolt messed it up, and just F7, he's going to queen, and GG. So I'm not sure if it was theoretically won the whole time, but at this point, Mindhunter is almost certain to take that to victory, and it happened very quickly at the end. Maybe as the games go on, I'll be able to get ahead of the commentary. So sorry, the first game, I wasn't able to get ahead of the commentary, so I don't know what he just did. That had to have been a mind slip. That had to have been a mouse slip, and he resigns. So Mindhunter has a clear victory there. Destruction. I'm actually looking. RayHolt has a better record, 12-4 against Mindhunter, but Mindhunter had a clear, easy path to victory there. He had made a queen. It takes a little bit of talent to bring the victory home. That had to have been a mouse slip. So 10-game series. 5 games to win. That he didn't want to lose with that mouse slip in a one game, but it happened. So I would still say Mindhunter is the big favorite here. And you say they're both going for these theoretical A4, H4. So only top players really. Most players, don't realize the strategy. So from like when Duvid plays in these and beats your average player, it's the simple strategy of opening up the H or A file and getting your queen behind the pawns and then trying to take all the pawns while the person tries the queen. And the advanced strategy, that's very unlikely to work. I mean, saying I wouldn't be surprised if the A or H file gets opened up in one of these games, but it's not going to be from the techniques that are used in the average game. So you have a theoretical lines where in order to try to prevent the push of H5 or A5, immediately the first opening move is A4. So we saw in the Crazy House World Championship, like Chicken Cross the Road played A6 against Jasugi. And but so playing, it's an advanced strategy that your average player wouldn't even consider. So also these A4 are advanced theoretical moves that generally are causing advanced Horde strategies to be employed. So you're not seeing the typical type Horde games and leading to these complicated structures here. So it looks like Mindhunter might have successfully, you'll be able to just open up the A file and get his queen behind it. All the opening at the end of the day, he blocked the A4, but then he pawn takes, rerouted his, he was able to exchange the C pawn, get his knight on that pawn, and he didn't want to take back to let it be doubled. But at this point, it looks like Mindhunter is going to have the simple, straightforward A strategy opening, just bishop, D7. I guess he probably knows these positions and whether it's safe to go immediately for the A file. But in a move or two, at some point, it's going to be Queen A8 and Rook X A2, and then the queen is going to get behind the pawn. So here it goes, and I mean, Ray's a strong player, so like I guess there's probably some play in this, but it would look like Mindhunter is probably an extreme favorite to win here, and I'm not sure if he, I mean, it wasn't like he crushed them out of the opening, but Ray's A4 strategy, which his goal is, one, to prevent the rook shuffle, and I'm not sure Mindhunter is planning on playing the rook shuffle for black. Like if we see Sinamon versus Stubenfisch later, we're likely, and maybe if I stream it, we may or may not see a rook shuffle in this match. So the strategy here is, can you just take A1, then C1, and then D1, and then slowly work your way back to nibble those pawns? And even here, take C1, then E1, then D2, then C3, then B4, then C5, or whatever. And, should he come in now with the light squares and C2, B3? So he brings the knight out immediately. I guess the rook in a lot of times in these positions. I would think that Mindhunter is easily won here. Last game I thought he was easily won, and he was, but he did a mouse slip and lost. I'm still predicting Mindhunter is the favorite to win this. I think he's probably better here in winning, although there might be some chances, because obviously, at this point, if he pushes B2, the king itself can't block it, but the queen comes back. So if Mindhunter had done, so to say, queen takes E1, he would be in a much worse situation. So at least there's some possibilities here that the pawn there's on B6, it's not going anywhere. If the king allows, that's an immediate queening threat. To play B7 if the queen can't stop it. But the question is, can Ray do something? Because the queen, as long as it could come back, the queen could nibble pawns. I mean, saying technically he could, probably maybe even play queen takes E1. If he played B7, he brings the queen back. And even here, he could take on C1, on F1 and bring the queen back. How dangerous is F6? Can RayHolt, the queen here on C4 is eyeing the pawn on E3. So RayHolt can't play F6. E6, because it can't play F6, because then the pawn on E6 would hang. And it might be like basically a zugzwang here. At some point, that there's no way for Ray to make progress. Although maybe, if he just stays on this file looking at E6, that there's no way for Ray to make progress. And eventually he will be able to just nibble the pawns with his queen, and his queen could come back should he ever push B7, just easily take the pawn. And even here, had he taken on E7, then he could almost never play F6, because then the king will just take E6. So the question of the zugzwang here, just bishop back, neither player has much time to think about it. So both of them at this point have to go on some sort of intuitive minimal amount to actually calculate something. So presumably Mindhunter will keep with the queen eyeing E6 strategy, and you maybe shuffle a few squares so he lets the queen off of E6. So he takes that pawn. Look at the pawn on B2. So the queen could still get back. So I think RayHolt messed up, because pushing now, the game should easily be Mindhunter's. I don't think any of this is going to help. The queen is just going to nab the pawn on B7, and he just takes the pawn. So even the game is not completely over, but at some point something had to give. You knew the strategy, you knew what Ray's possibilities were, and it was basically pushing the B7 and off-centering the queen, but the queen just stayed on a file where it could reach B1 there. And he may have been able to get away with taking G1 at this point. He's got to take there. He could probably just play something like queen to, he's got to be a little bit worried, like a G4 push. But yeah, I think this is in the bag now. he could probably just queen to e6. He could just keep his queen on that file, one of any files. The queen could stop 2 pawns. King or queen could stop 2 files. So stopping 3 files together, this is over. So Mindhunter pretty easily, not that easily. It wasn't a giveaway, but he opened the A file, like the A4, the A5 strategy of closing off the A file. Mindhunter, it delayed the penetration of the A file, but it worked, the basic strategy. So Mindhunter is also using this A4, A5 technique, A5 and H5. And we'll see if Ray goes for a thinning of the center strategy or to try to still open the A file. So he sacrifices the knight for 2 pawns. He has the open A file. If he could immediately get his queen behind his rook and sack on A3, that would work. But in this position, it's very likely that he'll be able to push A4 and block the A file. But it's not over. The A file, like at a certain point, White could say, I've protected the A file. He's not going to get his queen. There's no way he's going to break through and get behind and be forced into a holding strategy. Now it's looking good. Now it looks like Ray will open the A file. At this point, because he has got his pawn on B5 like that, at this point, there is nothing Mindhunter could do from the A file opening. And so Ray goes for it immediately, pushes the rook to A6, and the queen will probably go to C7 and then A7 or D7, all the various methods, and he will get his queen behind the pawns, and we're off. See if Mindhunter could do any better than Ray did last game. So just like last game, Mindhunter successfully penetrated the A file, got his queen behind the pawns. Ray kept it close. He had quite a bit of play, and but at the end of the day, Mindhunter kept it in control and won the game. So here too, the position is a little bit different. Saying it's not the exact same position we had last game, where Mindhunter, he opened up the A file in a different way. And so he still hasn't even got his queen to A7. So it looked like for a certain period of time that he could have just played here. He could have played, if he played queen A7 right away, he might have lost the pawn on C6. So he takes on C6, and so he goes straight to A7, and we have an interesting position. So obviously rook takes A3 was the idea. That was the idea all along. Mindhunter with his double pawn hanging position at least got an advanced pawn on C6, and maybe he could push this. So interesting here, because if he goes back, maybe he pushes B7 next move, and he has to take with the queen to prevent the queen, and then he wins the rooks. I mean, even this might still be prep, and you have to check opening book, and it's very possible that this is his prep, and he had this position. He knew the strategy largely from his preparation or even previous play. That would not surprise me at all. And I gotta assume he's going to take the rook here, but does that mean he successfully prevented the penetration and Ray will be forced into a holding strategy? Or is it possible that Ray could still penetrate here? And maybe he just pushes C6. Maybe he could push C3 here and be safe, but then he has the advanced pawn, which is dangerous. Or if he takes back, So he does push c3 here, which he doesn't want to leave that advanced pawn on d3, but it might hold. So I'm saying he pushes this pawn, and if he has to push b2 soon at some point, it could be that Mindhunter successfully stopped the penetration of the A file, and but at what cost? And can Ray enter a holding strategy here and win anyways? Saying like how likely is it, or can Mindhunter set himself free? Does he have the possibility of playing e2? Is it possible he could play e2 at some point and free his position? Like the queen coming, if he plays e2 right away, like maybe the queen coming to a3 or something, the knight, the knight could immediately come to a5 and sack on b3 and open it up, and his attack on the king side might be too slow. So I think Ray is likely to win this game. After b3, the king side pawns look extremely slow. So I wasn't sure if I was going to stream or not. I actually ordered some vegetarian food, nibble a few bites here. I mean, if it's remotely possible, he's still holding here. I thought he was breaking through. I mean, now he could definitely break through. 4 pawns. I mean, g6 is likely to happen at some point. I mean, you got to assume this is much, much better for Ray, but with the time situation, and Mindhunter definitely didn't want to let g6 happen there, if he could. So he keeps his queen eyeing it, and castles, saving move. Can he pivot on the queen side, besides that pawn there? I mean, saying it's going to be annoying for Ray to have to pick up the pawn on a7. But yeah, it looks like, the queen side pawns are just going to take too many moves to advance. And, so it's a shame Mindhunter had that mouse slip the first time. So now Ray will take a lead 2-1. So good for RayHolt, like lucky with that mouse slip. And, this just looks over. I mean, he could drag it on a move or two. Maybe, I mean, there's some threats there. So, I mean, if he had just taken queen on e4, that could have been losing to h2 and then, g2. But I think Ray will know how to win this. So now he could just probably take. Yeah, so it's pretty decisive. And so we enter the 4th game. So Horde World Championship. I think we got 5 people tuned in, nothing in the chat so far. I think Horde's not that popular of a variant. I didn't even really describe it that much because if here it's the World Championship, it's more advanced commentary. And because it's the World Championship, it's kind of boring. Like chess, they're playing these kind of boring lines with these a4, a5, h5. Both players are playing it. And I don't know, Sinamon and Stubenfisch are also going to have kind of these boring a5, h5 lines. They might, because from a championship level, it might be the best strategy to go with. But in terms of excitement, the games aren't that exciting. The last 2 games, the first game, Stubenfisch had a good win with white, but lost it to a mouse slip. He got the queen, and it was an exciting game. The next 2 games, the A file was penetrated, and there was play and excitement. Actually, I'm sorry, last game, Ray did not penetrate the A file, but the threat of penetrating the A file caused Mindhunter to really weaken his position and eventually got penetrated and lost in a similar way. Here, Ray looks extremely unlikely to have his A file penetrated. Like saying the game before, he lost through having the A file penetrated, and he did a really blocking strategy. And in Mindhunter, then we try a6, and now he has the stronghold there with the dark squares that at this point Mindhunter has no choice but to enter a holding strategy. So if you see the color complexes like the squares, and I'm not really good at clicking, but I guess these squares here are all over defended. So eventually white is going to have to push one of these squares and will lose a pawn. In all likelihood, white will have to push more of these squares and lose a pawn. So this is what is called a holding strategy. And he had to lose a pawn because at that point he had no choice but to push on one of these squares of h5, f5, d5, or b5, and he did first with h5, so he just takes. So now if he takes back, the rook will just take the pawn, or he could leave it there. He doesn't have to take the pawn back, and he could immediately go for f5. If he does that, notice all the pieces, the knight and bishop and the queen, so he will still probably sack pieces on that square. And then, he could even go for d5. But, there's a lot of pawns here. So 36 pawns. The thinning strategy, even if he loses a few pawns. Okay, so Mindhunter immediately goes for the h-file, takes a pawn. And now Ray is in immediate danger, of losing the g5 pawn or the rook sack on h3. So he defends and plays h4. Now Mindhunter could immediately snap e5 if he wanted. He could probably bring his knight out. So he immediately sacks the rook for h4. And honestly, I'm not sure. I guess he figures he's going to get at least 3 pawns for to get the queen behind. He can't defend. He's going to be able to take h4, and then he's going to be able to take g4. He's not going to be able to push his pawn up onto f4 to defend the pawn without letting the queen get to the back rank. So minimally, and so Ray, really doesn't have anything to do. So he's got to, go for b5. These squares, and he wins another pawn. So I told you of the holding strategy in those squares I pointed out where you had. Everything was blacked off except for these squares, and it cost white a pawn to open them. And so at this point, he's given the pawns. Mindhunter preemptively sacked his rook before he had to, which probably guarantees him at least 3 pawns. Ray gives up the e pawn. This looks basically over here. I assume there's a tiny bit of play left. There might be a few tricks that Ray has left. But I assume this is basically lost. Like bishop takes h2 probably is winning. Just bishop takes h2 might be winning. But he doesn't have to. He could probably retreat it just to be safe. And he's got a huge time advantage. Bishop takes h2. If he takes it back, then queen taking on h4 will fork the pawns on h2 and f2. So he goes for that. And he really only has 3 files. So the king, knight, and bishop, the pawns move really slowly. So, it's not likely that Ray could create anything to cause any damage. So the queen just snapping pawns. The rook may or may not have to come back. So, at this point now, the knight there is really hampering because he can't push his pawn to c3, because then the knight would take on b6. He can't push the pawn to c6. This pawn weakness of the last move, so he's kind of zugzwang. So slow play, has to slowly push this pawn up in order to attack the knight, so he can make some sort of progress. And how does he just sacks the knight for the b3 pawn, very prolonging. The bishop could come here. Yeah, so if bishop takes d3, yeah, so I mean, he has a tiny bit of play and some threats here, but I don't think so. Now he could just sack, and the queen, covers b2. It's well defended. It's over. So Mindhunter, easy win with black there. It was interesting. Ray successfully blocked the a file, prevented a penetration, but the light square holding strategy worked, and he was just able to thin him out. And even though he didn't break through, as he pushed forward, he thinned himself out enough that Mindhunter was just able to pick up enough pawns and eventually get his queen behind the pawns without penetrating the file. So here, a little more kind of like the theory. After a4, the e6, just trading it off. Like the last time he didn't, the holding strategy, Ray did not go for a6 in a holding strategy, but sacked the knight and now has the open a file. Last time, Mindhunter allowed Ray to push b5 and then get his rook, queen behind the rook, and even though he didn't open up the a file and his Mindhunter's little c4 d5 trick didn't work well enough, and Ray won. So Reviler, welcome. Yes, I know about Deep Blue. Good for you. Okay, so we have a different variation this time, and now Mindhunter plays a4. So now if he plays b5, he'll be able to play a5 and prevent the penetration of the a file in that way. I mean, it's possible. I've had similar positions as black, and you could actually route your bishop around. So you could play like b5 here. He didn't go for that. And then work the bishop around from f8 to here to sack on here. So instead, he goes for just an immediate sack for one pawn. And we had this, I guess, the first game that Mindhunter won. So this was the first game that I was late in the commentary. So I think this is the exact replication of the first game position that Mindhunter was winning, and Mouse slipped on and lost. So yes, this so game one, Mindhunter was successfully able to turn this into a victory, prevent Ray from penetrating anywhere. That this little cute technique here of sacking the bishop, and then picking the pawn back up with the rook because it can't be taken, leaves the rook trapped there. And in game one, Mindhunter was able, I'm not sure if he was winning actually. It could be that Ray had fallen into a mistake and shouldn't have let him queen and made a mistake. I didn't have a chance to look at the computer. But no, I think this is the exact same. I'm pretty sure this is the exact same. So let's see what happened. Let me take a little bite, get a little food in me. Sorry for the dead time. Yeah, the rook there is basically immune. As long as the queen is movable, the rook is immune to capture. So this is a highly theoretical Horde position that unlikely even a grandmaster would even think about. But I mean, you think about the rook here is immune to capture, because if you even tried d3 and then pawn x rook, that would open up the d file to the queen. And if you played b3, you could just play rook takes c3, and if you take the rook back with the d pawn, that also opens the file to the queen. So as of now, the rook is immune to capture, but that's fine. Just leave the rook there and advance on the king side. And eventually, last time Mindhunter was able to create a queen on the king side. That was the path to victory last time. That was only stymied by a mouse slip. So you got a trade of pawns there. The rook now on e4 in a similar position, still largely immune to capture, although d3. So straight sack. I guess probably g5, defend the pawn. And it's still a pretty close game here. So it's saying Ray has not broken through. He might be able to play f4 here. F4 might be a dangerous move. So he decides against f4 and ends up giving up 2 pawns because of it. And now we see he better get those queen sides rolling quickly. So good props Ray here. He has decent chances here. Saying that the first game of the mouse slip, so those queen side pawns are quick, and the queen finally gets behind the pawns, and they're going to be nibbled. Maybe a c3 here to e3, and how quickly do those 8 pawns run? And so he goes with c3 first. The problem is, he has to waste a lot of queen moves. Pawns move really slow. So moving those pawns up is extremely time consuming. And so he's created a network where he finally got his pawns up, and his hope is that his queen is so distracted against the threat of the pawns that he could start advancing on the king side again. And I don't know what happened if he just pushed b7 here. I guess the king goes up, sacrifice a rook. So Ray wins again there. That now, that it'd be interesting if the series ended on a mouse slip, a 10-game series, and RayHolt 3-2 lead halfway over. Can he get 2.5 more victories? And they're still going for the a4 line every game. And it's the safest strategy. It's kind of a boring, making for a boring world championship. But that makes sense. Some players want to win. So last time Mindhunter was able to get into a successful holding strategy. I mentioned exactly how it happened. Ray last time traded his H pawn for the G6 pawn, opened up the A file. So it's different than last time, but the strategy is the exact same. It's the same light square holding strategy that now he could safely push H5 if he wants, because the file hasn't been opened. He didn't sacrifice for this. I usually sacrifice right away. And so eventually he's going to have to push to one of these squares, and he's going to lose a pawn. And then he's probably going to have to do. He's probably going to lose a pawn on multiple squares here, but White has chances. So, relatively, that's why he did the A pawn holding the A pawn strategy. And I've had positions like this against Ray. I've played Ray. I've beat him occasionally, even in positions like this. So he goes first with F5, and he's lost a pawn. He could take back. He could, consider something like H3, G4, or an immediate D5, or F4. There's a whole bunch of different ideas he could work with, like an F4 here, just to solidify. And the holding strategy will continue. So Mindhunter won a pawn, and it's still basically a holding strategy here where Ray is going to have to lose a few more pawns per force, and eventually could be thinned out to a point where black will be able to get his queen behind and start sniping the pawns. So, as I say, he went for h3. He could go for g4 here. It's possible h3 was to prep for g4, and he went f4 here, so he still could be planning g4. You could see f3 and g4 are likely coming at some point. Mindhunter is probably considering that he probably prefers to have him take the pawn on f5 than to take on e4. And so now he may not take that back. If he takes it back and then his queen takes back, he's going to lose h5 also. So the immediate push here off balance. So he could just play back queen to f7, but then maybe e3 comes right away, or he could take the pawn and leave the pawn on h6, because obviously the pawn on h6 isn't going anywhere. If he takes the bishop, he'll be able to come back and take it. So he could win the pawn. He could sacrifice his knight for 2 pieces on d5 here. He could just retreat his queen. So yeah, it's pretty unclear. Interesting game. So he goes back to d7. Not even and as I said, like if he takes the bishop on h6, that pawn's not going anywhere. And even if he's still going to go for f3, so he takes the opportunity to conquer that territory. So that pawn on d6 isn't going anywhere. It's blocked by 2 pawns. He's going to have to sacrifice 2 pieces to dislodge that, but he still has the light square holding strategy. So even if Ray has eaten permanent territory into Mindhunter territory, so now he could bring the knight back and capture on h6, and also the queen. So he doesn't, Mindhunter does not mind his knight being eaten. He doesn't mind giving up his knight for nothing, even though he could have rewrote it from g8 to h6 and sniped a pawn. And yeah, I gotta say, like, this position's beyond my pay grade to a certain extent. This is why these guys are the top players in the world. They're playing very theoretical positions, and so you see now the pawn on d2 is hanging. Interesting choice, just knight g6 obviously opens up the h file, which would allow him to sack his rook on h4 and get his queen behind the pawns. So that is his path to victory. Mindhunter, very clear, obvious strategy, just rook takes pawn, and then rook takes h4. And if he takes back, so this is a more clear path. Let's say the queen up, and then bishop takes h3. Time's ticking down. There might be a breakthrough here. He could try to extract his bishop, like bishop g4 and back, or f5 here. Or if he's going to lose the bishop, try to do it in the way that dislocates Ray's pawns the most. So you see that white square weakness still. Ray is going to lose a pawn on that b5 square from the original setup of the holding strategy. Eventually he was going to have to work with those queenside pawns, and when he did, he was going to lose a pawn because of the holding strategy. And at this point, Mindhunter is still not broken through. Everything here in this position, Mindhunter has now finally gotten his pieces behind the pawns. And so clever there, b7 first before taking. So now some serious threats here. So he has to sack the rook immediately to stop queening. It looked like some serious threats. So the game continues on. I gotta say, this probably favoring Ray, but he has to come up with a strategy that queen could snipe those pawns very quickly. That so now already that's snapping a pawn. He's got a protected light square complex structure because at this point he only has a queen and a rook, and the light square complex is safe for all the pawns. So if he had tried to nibble the pawns, I'm not sure. Ray may have messed this up. It may not have been winning. It may, he could take the pawn now with his rook, takes that way, and he might be able to bring his rook back. So it looks like Mindhunter won this somehow. It was looking like Ray may have had something there. You have to look at the computer analysis. Those positions, good game is going to get down to something like that. It's very tough to evaluate. So whether that was +5, -5, even, that's what separates the top players to be able to evaluate those positions, even though, in time pressure also. So now we get a rook shuffle. It's funny that Ray has won with black every time. The first time Ray won with black was due to a mouse slip. You have to look at that game. And so we hadn't seen a rook shuffle here. Now we get Ray doing a rook shuffle, and the various strategies, obviously, like we said, this is the ultimate holding strategy of not even trying to create some sort of piece placement, but just leaving the original piece placement as the holding strategy and letting the other person come forward and only reacting to whites coming forward as opposed to actively trying to create a holding strategy. And Mindhunter goes for the most basic white color complex because you don't have to sacrifice a pawn to do it because of the weakness on g6 and the light squares. You could enter this position without sacrificing a pawn with white. So say at this point, I think he did sacrifice a pawn on the H file though to advance his pawns. So this is a very typical shuffle position. I mean, there's other strategies. The F6 has been a popular white approach. B6. So this is the most generic, common pattern, and usually, like they're pushing B6 at this point is really your only option. You're going to push B6, and so pushing here instead of taking back immediately is I've never done that. Saying Mindhunter, definitely this is preparation. Even though this is move 35, this is preparation. There's no way that both of these players have not had this position on the board. And it's preparation, even though it's move almost 40, because in the rook shuffle, almost all these positions converge into the same patterns. So be interesting, like as I said, these players definitely have prep for the rook shuffle. I was surprised it took to game 7 that we're seeing a rook shuffle. And at this point, D6 or F6 is going to be played pretty quickly. So Ray eventually takes the pawn on C5. Mindhunter, preferring not to take that first. If he had let there, B6 would have won the queen. That's happened. B6 and the queen would have been trapped, would have been forced to go to D7, and wouldn't even be able to. And so black has very few squares to work with. You say like B6, but at the same time, rook takes A2, queen takes the A file penetration has happened. So the rook shuffle eventually, per force, led to a position where the A file penetration has happened, because usually you end up sacrificing the pawns on the side first because the bishops and knights are bearing down at this squares in the center. It's easier to thin white out in the center than the side. So Mindhunter has went for the strategy of sacrificing the pawns on the rook files first. C7's somewhat of the threat because the knight could be an awkward piece. But a question, what could white do here? So this is the rook shuffle. So at this point, if black moves one of his rooks back, then the pawn will be able to do en passant ahead of the rook shuffle. So RayHolt chooses to sacrifice his knight, and we're back in a similar situation. So this is very complicated. Should he leave the pawn on d2, push it to d4? The certain strategy. So I was saying this might even relatively still be book, even though it's like move 50. That this might be a position that they've looked at before. It might be a position that's due to the nature of the rook shuffle and Horde, even though we're on move 46, that this might be book. And that's kind of what makes Horde interesting strategically. We got Revenge of the Fallen, like 800, who insist on challenging me. Okay, so Ray does not sacrifice the rook, enters his queen through a temporary diagonal weakness that was opened up in order to defend the b3 pawn, and then Mindhunter traps his queen now behind his own pawns. So how serious of a threat is just b7? It looks like b7 here is just game over. If it was white's move, b7, game over. Can he stop b7? Does king d8, then b7? It looks like king d8 might prevent immediate queening. This also rook back, but now he has c6, and this could be even worse. That now that he brings the rook back, he's just going to be able to play c6 and b7 now, and now the king to d8. I thought king d8 honestly was probably a better play, but maybe neither of them work. So now at this point, he can't quite push c6 because the pawn hangs. So can he push a4, a5? Because his queen is trapped behind the pawn. So does he have time to just simply push a4, a5? If he plays queen takes b1, and then he plays a5, and then he plays queen takes b3, and then he plays queen c6. Is that too slow? Does he have anything better than just playing queen takes b1 here? And it's the book, so he doesn't take b1. He maybe could play a2 here, and then I guess he plays a2. Then he plays there. I guess he can play b4, and so he sacks the rook here. Can his queen come around? If he had tried queen to a4, eventually. So now we're still in a holding position here, because the queen is preventing a5 and c5. So now he opens up d3. Okay, so that all the work was to open up d3, and now b2, and it looks like Mindhunter has won here. So beautiful game here. He beat the rook shuffle with the classical white square strategy, and which generally people have been switching away from the most basic light square strategy. So I said Mindhunter was the favorite. He only lost the first game due to a mouse slip. So without that mouse slip, it would have been 5-2. So it's 4-3 now, and Mindhunter with black is likely to bring his black to a victory. He's using a slightly different strategy than he used in the previous matches. Ray is still going with a4. So last game was the first time we didn't have an a5, and then Ray went for the rook shuffle, and Mindhunter was able to beat RayHolt's rook shuffle. And we see Sinamon is extremely likely to use the rook shuffle. I would assume Stubenfisch also was prepared for Sinamon's rook shuffle. So Mindhunter beating Ray's rook shuffle, will be indicative of what may happen in the match coming up between Sinamon and Stubenfisch. So instead of pushing a6 here, Mindhunter, he went for the h6 strategy. So it's unclear. The last times we saw Mindhunter win through a holding strategy, you basically a light square defense holding strategy that worked twice in different permutations. This time we don't have a holding strategy with like kind of an open game, and it's unclear. Obviously, knight takes c6 and then a5. So to sack the knight on f4 right away, interesting move. Just think, why would that possibly be a good move? Like, obviously he could just take the bishop back. What is he getting out of this? I'm not sure. Why did Ray not immediately just take the bishop? Was he seeing ghost and scared? And I gotta admit, I gotta admit, I must. I don't know if the bishop is poison or Ray fearing ghosts. So I'm not an expert in these lines, like saying this may be, now at this point, the queen obviously could take h4. So if he had taken the bishop now, if he takes the bishop, the pawn at h4 is hanging. So in the move g3 there. So I'm not sure if Ray was just seeing ghost and, why he's leaving his bishop hanging on f4. Another move, they took the pawn, that he'd leave the bishop hanging. Now at this point, obviously, so I got to say that I think Ray had to take the bishop the first move if he wanted to do that before. But I mean, I think that he had to take the bishop. I can't imagine that. But who knows? Like, this is the World Championship, and he might not have been in his preparation. And maybe it was a poison bishop from the beginning. Stubenfisch saying queen h4 was annoying enough that he was scared about it. In this position now, it's an open game, and Stubenfisch, who likely will beat Sinamon. Sinamon has his chances. We'll see that later today. Just like Mindhunter's the favorite over RayHolt. RayHolt has improved quite a bit recently. Stubenfisch is the great favorite over Sinamon, but Sinamon was improved quite a bit this last year. And see if there's what they have prepared for each other. But Stubenfisch likes white here, and so it's open game. He could be right that there's no breakthrough. The pawns A and H pawn, because Mindhunter is stuck with his pawns in front of his rook. He has limited choices and ability to break through. Like generally, you want to free to some extent. I mean, like for black, you want to free your rook to possibly sacrifice and open up the file. So with the A and H pawn, it is extremely unlikely that black is going to break through here. What's his best hope for a holding strategy? Is he eyeing e5 here? So obviously, d4, he's got to make a point where he's likely going to sack a piece for 2 pawns based on certain advances. So if he's eyeing d4, is saying he's going to sack on d4. Eventually, Ray is going to have to push e5. So he pushes d3 here, and so he doesn't even have lined up a way to sack a piece for 2 pawns. I was saying, so Mindhunter definitely, at that point, is looking for a way to sack a piece for 2 pawns. He still may have a holding strategy. It looks like Ray at some point could just play d4, and even here like c5. It doesn't look like Mindhunter has an established threat, so to say, like a color complex holding strategy, but can he thin him down? At some point, Ray has to go for it, and Mindhunter might be able to you break him down. So he didn't even get a piece for 2 pawns. He got 3 pawns for 2 pieces, and without any follow up. So this is presumably quite good for White. And so now he's looking. Maybe he could just push d6. He's even having a hard time sacrificing his bishop for 2 pawns. But he has been thinned down to 2 pawns in the D and E file, 3 pawns in the C and F files. So there's 4 pawns on the queen side. He's probably going to go with that. And Mindhunter is hoping he could sacrifice like a rook and a bishop to break it open. So Ray goes with the queen side because he has the most extra pawns there. He could likely slowly advance, and he decides to get rid of the pesky bishop right away because of the threat on f3. And Ray parries the threat, cost him a pawn, pushes immediately. Time pressure is going to be a question. So Stubenfisch is probably right. It's probably was better for White. Did what happened in this time pressure hurt or help White? F4 locking in that pawn structure immediately. The king comes back. The rook could come back. Yeah, it's tough to say what's going on here. So finally, Mindhunter has got his queen behind the pawns. It's just a rook left. It's question how dangerous, how quick those pawns are coming. 2 pawns against the rook. He sacrifices a pawn right away in hopes for f3, in hopes for g3 to have 3 pawns. Mindhunter decides to not allow that. Coming in g3 is going to give. Pawns are slowly advancing, but is that good enough? So he's got to do the king back to prevent. Now he could do rook takes h4. Very, very interesting here. So the queen finally gets to capture that pawn. d4 is weak. So I think Mindhunter, the series is at play here. So Ray really needs a win, and I think that Mindhunter has won this. So it was close. There's still some play, but yeah, now the pawn is going. It's Mindhunter's game. So closer than I expected. So there's still 2 games left, and really Mindhunter only lost the first game due to a mouse slip. So as I said, Mindhunter, it was the substantial favorite, even though their ratings are relatively close. You see, Mindhunter is really destroying Ray to quite an extent here. So even though Ray is from the top players in the world, so Mindhunter last time allowed the rook shuffle, and even though he won, decides to go back to a4 right away, a5 right away, and so he goes for the h6 strategy, sacrifice the pawn, and leaves black's pieces kind of clumsy with the pawn on c6. I think that's the idea. So these are, so he leaves the pawns doubled on the a file. So these are theoretical openings that you're not likely to see in regular play, that these players probably devised even to win with the computer help. And so it's very difficult to see beginner strategy in top play. So Mindhunter decides to allow the immediate sacrifice on d4. Obviously, he could have played e3 to prevent the queen for 2 pawns, but he decides to allow the thinning of the d file. to 2 pawns, which could be enough. Saying two pawns, the D file, he advances. I'm going to assume that Mindhunter is in a good situation here. So he advances the pawn. Does he allow A3? Did Mindhunter successfully prevent the A file penetration and have a good game here? I'm not sure. It would appear so. That Mindhunter, relatively for white, got out of the opening relatively good. So Mindhunter, Turkish player, a lot of strong Turkish players on the web. In Europe, there's the French server. Turks are usually, I think they're the largest minority in most countries in Europe. So Mindhunter representing Turkey, one of the strong players at Horde, and it was not over. Obviously he could sack the bishop. There doesn't look like a breakthrough. How much is it going to help him to sack the bishop on b5? Whether he even wants to do that. The D file is thin, and neither side has done anything on the queen side. So presumably, you're going to see Mindhunter probably advance the pawns on the king side some, and maybe if you could even block it like an f6 or something and get a good bind on the king side pawns to advance with. It's unlikely if Mindhunter could advance the queen side pawns in a way that wins material more than wins material and doesn't allow a breakthrough. He might, but I'm not sure this position. Like saying this is probably book. This position is almost certainly book. I would definitely assume Mindhunter has seen this position on the board before, or prepared for something like this. And so it looks like he could go for a quick d4. He could go for a quick. The problem is the pawn on c4 is not defended. So if he goes for d4 and then he has to go for d5, and then the queen might be able to work back around. So he's likely to just switch to the king side now. I'm not sure how successfully he might be able to. This is basically Horde. What Art of Deception was saying, basically, you need to sacrifice 2, 3, 4 pieces in the same area of the board to break through. So Ray just sees he could snipe that pawn on. I guess he didn't really do anything. He can't really take the knight, but he goes in, sacrifices the knight, and now could open up the rook file. So that's quite a bit of material there. And at this point, so he sacks the rook right away, and then he pushed the pawn in. I'm not sure if can he push a4? Does that help him? I'm not sure if Ray messed this up. I think Ray may have been trying to be cute and messed it up, and now he can't even get his queen around there. So queen to c3, then he could push again. So I think he was out-tricked himself there. We'll see. So he has to bring the bishop around, but Mindhunter has a lot of pawns. At least to some extent, that if Ray could take the b1 pawn, he's going to be able to get a second queen. But he's got a lot of pawns that are really far advanced. So I gotta assume Mindhunter is going to win this game in the series. But it's not over. Saying he's got to actually queen one of those pawns. But I don't see it. He just doesn't have the time to take that b1 pawn. And so Ray loses on time, and 6-3, the series is over. And I'm not sure if he's going to call it quits and play the 10th game, or say he lost. It's over. Mindhunter the expected favorite advances, and Gerard Perry asking about the Queen's Gambit and chess trash talk, saddest trash talk of all. Certain element. I mean, Queen's Gambit, I guess, is a good movie. It's interesting cinema. I think it's bad for chess players because it shows like chess players aren't that interesting. Like, in order for us to be interesting, you have to have non-chess players act like chess players. But it's also something about intelligence, and so I'm surprised actually. I'm like shocked that there's some show, and I haven't even watched it yet, that's so popular. So it looks like Ray has called it quits, and this series is over, and we have an advancement in the Horde World Championships, and there you have it, folks. Mindhunter beats RayHolt and advances to the quarterfinal. I guess I'll show the pairings, the spreadsheet, the tournament bracket. So because I started a little bit late, just for people who have no idea what's going on. This is the Horde World Championship. I'm even going to, I'll put in the chat. I'll add it even to the description of the video in case anyone, serious player or curious about this, never even heard of the game and wants to know more. So this is the unofficial, you need, I guess, an official sanctioning body of Horde players to make an official Horde World Championship. But the unofficial Horde World Championship organized by the top Horde players on the server. And you see the brackets. They had 4-player brackets who played each other, then 1 player won. And then from there, knockout brackets. So we're down to the final 4. And like the World Chess Championship, the current champion doesn't have to go through the qualifiers, and the winner gets to play the world champion. So Mindhunter advances against RayHolt. If I had played in this, it's possible I would have made this round. Very likely I would have made this round, although maybe not, maybe only this round. In the rankings, you could see that the knockout pairing has basically got it down to the top players. If you see, Daruko only plays very quick. It's unclear how good he is. This guy, lost in the most recent match, but a lot of these other guys like Liquid Horde, the high ratings, they only play very fast. Katask, very unlikely these players would have been competitive with the high ratings because they only play, like very quick. So you have the top players, Mindhunter, Stubenfisch, the 2 favorites, have been favorites for years. RayHolt, Sinamon, who's slowly been moving up the ranks. You see me there. I'm ranked 55. So even Royal Maniac, got better than I haven't played that much in the last year. And you see Royal Maniac, who is now better than me at Horde. Also, a little different patterning to it. Understanding, you see a few title players, but not necessarily that the better chess players do better. So Mindhunter master, not necessarily exceptional master. Stubenfisch, not even a master. RayHolt, weak master. Sinamon, not even an expert. So something about Horde, that the top players are not necessarily the top players in the game. So I guess Sabbath is coming here. Sundown's almost here, and it looks like they have the next round of the World Championship coming up pretty soon. And well, it's like Queen's Gambit, the nature, especially online, that chess, most players just use pseudonyms, and we don't really care who each other are. They're just here to play chess. We're here to win, here to think. And like, if we met each other in real life, we probably wouldn't be friendly even. Like, chess players have a certain personality, self-deprecating humor, intellectualism. Is not the most social, friendly bunch in many ways. That so let me see if I'm going to wait around like 15 minutes and try to catch the other qualification bracket between Sinamon, at least the first few games between Sinamon and Stubenfisch. So it looks like that should be happening in about 15 minutes. So let me just get on this and see they're all right here. Stubenfisch will be playing Sinamon. You see Sinamon, I played a ton of games. He's beat me 87 times. I've played 16 games. Stubenfisch, I beat him at Crazy House. So he's beat me 12-0 at Horde. In the one game we played at Crazy House, I beat him. In fact, I saw him playing Crazy House. I was like, yes, I finally get to beat this guy. Also, Mindhunter, I found he played in the weekly Crazy House, and I was like, oh, please bear me against Mindhunter. So I finally get a win off of him. And I was able to relatively, they both have 2,000 ratings in Crazy House, but I was still able to relatively beat them quite easily without much counterplay. But, Stubenfisch will be coming here any minute. So I was looking at part of the reason I'm doing this, and Fernand Gobet from Switzerland, and I looked at really all of his works, and I'm going to probably do a complete review of the works of Fernand Gobet, and I even ordered one of his books. So the chunking theory and advancement one's called CHREST, and CHREST is chunk hierarchy and retrieval structures. So chess variance in a certain way of perception and the expert mind and pattern formations and the structured formations and predictable ways in which people form patterns that could somewhat be scientifically tested and demonstrated through computers, artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithms. So CHREST, which I've covered on my previous streams and have the reading material, and I'm going to be covering it more, is an advanced chunking theory. It's chunk hierarchy and retrieval structures, where it's not purely trunking. It's like a template theory. So the model combines low-level aspects of cognitions, mechanisms, monitoring, information, short-term memory, with high-level aspects of cognition strategies. Consists of perceptual facilities for interacting with the external world, short-term memory stores, in particular visual and verbal memory stores, a long-term memory store, and an associated mechanism for problem solving. Short-term memory in CHREST contains references to chunks held in long-term memory, which are recognized through the discrimination network from information acquired from the perception system. And here's a little diagram. So it's saying this is more a cognitive process that could be loosely based on possibly mechanisms of the mind uses to form thought, but it's more based on an introspective model of how the mind forms thought, or testing on human actions and how humans act, and determining from that the likely processes that the mind occurs. Is not based on necessarily biological processes or modeling what the computer does and assuming the human works the same way. There's some biological precedents I've covered in my other streams, attention, sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, and these things. But the CHREST model is an advanced model that has presumably all of these things working together, and it's most tested with chess. So learning is seen as the acquisition of networks or nodes, chunks, which also become connected as a function of the similarity of their contents. Chunks can be seen as clusters of information that can be used as units of perception and meaning. The chunks in simulation below will be fragments of chess positions. As an EPAM, long-term memory is represented as a discrimination network which sorts of stores chunks. Patterns that recur often in the environment make it possible for chunks to evolve into more complex data structures known as templates. Templates are schema-like structures that have slots allowing value to be encoded rapidly. Simulations are carried out by allowing the model to acquire knowledge by receiving stimuli representatives of the domain under study. For example, during the learning phase of the chess simulations, the program incrementally acquires chunks and templates by scanning a large database of positions taken from master-level games. This makes it possible to create networks of various sizes and so to simulate the behaviors of players of different skill levels taken together with the presence of time and capacity parameters. This enables CHREST to make unambiguous and quantitative predictions. A lot of chess coaches, say like understand, don't memorize, understand. But from a cognitive perspective, what is understanding is a question. Understanding is a form of pattern recognition, and understanding is essentially a function of memory. You see the model here to put it at the level of what's going on. So perception, a significant aspect of CHREST, is the importance it places on the perception process. Rather than passively collecting information from the environment, the process of information gathering is directed by knowledge already learned. This, in turn, affects the knowledge that is captured, resulting in complex emergent behavior. In the case of chess experiments, perception is equated with eye movements approximately corresponding to attention, which is directed by chunks held in memory and heuristics. Limitations, an important requirement of any model that is claimed to simulate human cognition, is that it is not assume any abilities exceeded those of a human. Thus, the parameters of a CHREST model are restricted to the human limits as understood by our current comprehension of human psychology. For example, by default, the size of the visual short-term memory is limited to 4 items, and the time required for moving the eye, saccade. The majority of the variables in CHREST are time-related, so an internal clock is used to keep track of them. Each time an action is simulated by the system that is understood to take real time, such as mentally moving a piece, the clock is incremented by a period of time as measured or estimated. So the interesting science behind this, and eventually, I'm going to come out against this because this is really an evolutionary-based theory to some extent, and the assumption, that their model is on the hard problem of consciousness is my claim is are false. But in order to present my theories, I'm first going to present the theories of one of the best thinkers on the topic, which is Fernand Gobet from Switzerland. And, so I prepared a bunch of his papers on the CHREST model, and we're going to look at perception. And, so here you can see, I might even read through some of these analysis, use forward and backward reasoning during a valuation problem. And you see it's like the black box problem, that you're trying to understand the mind from what the mind supposedly does. Like a chess player, that you can measure everything a chess player does, and then you can make a theory on how the mind works, and you could test it based on predictions that if the mind works in a certain way, that chess players will act in a certain way, and then you can use objective measures of science in order to try to prove the theories. Okay, Church of Entropy. Yeah, we have the World Championship of this Horde variation that I love with all the pawns. And the first quarterfinal brackets. The first round just finished. In another few minutes, we're going to have the second round, and trying to provide some commentary. So in the intermediary, I am offering some analysis on these chunking theories that are most developed in chess. So you're saying Duvid's a chess player, and showing that the most developed of all cognitive models for how the mind performs thoughts are in fact largely on chess players. And so cognitive training, methodological recommendations, research on the effects of behavioral interventions aimed at cognitive enforcement after addressing some points. So these questions about expertise and the development of expertise and intelligence and IQ and training, and chess is actually the best studied field. Obviously, there's college fields of internet and athletic management, physical management, all sorts of training. But an actual train, I took language acquisition. I studied linguistics. But chess is very well studied. So compared to language, it's not as well studied as language. But chess has well-defined expertise levels. So language, you just say like people become proficient in language, but you wouldn't think to give a person a rating. You know, so like I'm a 1800 English speaker, but in reality, you could. If you think of it, like chess is more objective, so you have a winner and a loser of the game, and here we're looking at expertise. I was mentioning Dutton, the articles, Simon, the original studies of chess players and the test on them in memory. I haven't looked. It looked like Simon had some of those studies on YouTube. I was looking at, but to take this approach, the original idea: 10,000 of mastery, 10,000 hours of study for mastery, regardless of IQ. And at a certain point, effort, there might be a curve where natural ability benefits, but at a certain point, that it's effort that's the main thing, not natural ability. And so I'm going to continue going through the best studies in the field, and then eventually try to advance my own theories. You know, I even changed that on my profile here. Volunteer chess coach trying to make the world a better place through chess, and propagator of spiritual and scientific theories on chess. Now I largely only play chess for Israel. So that, you know, okay, I want to win for Israel. You know, like I won a game, I won for Israel. But in reality, I'm trying to propagate theories about chess. I've been meaning to read through a bunch of these papers. People have been asking me, like, when I'm going to ask the rabbi, and there's a whole bunch of papers on the effect of chess in education. Really, that's what I do. Like, I'm not that concerned with, like, who's going to be the world champion, who's the best. My main concept was pure training of people for cognitive excellence through the game of chess and becoming better thinkers. So I'm going to focus more on reading these papers and scientific studies. And you know, it's kind of like Queen's Gambit. You know, I showed you Sunil Mortimontre, that, you know, because of COVID-19, I'm not coaching chess. Usually I would be coaching chess on Fridays. I haven't done it since the beginning of COVID-19. But, you know, Sunil Mortimontre, Nakamura's father-in-law, Demystifying Chess was the name of his program. It's saying that, like Queen's Gambit, chess is a mystery to most people. People are just like, oh, chess, who knows? Like, why is someone good at chess? Why isn't it? And it's hard to understand. You know, so Sunil said, like, it's not like some deep mystery chess. Like, you know, it's been demystified, and he could explain the processes, what creates expertise, what's the difference between the thought process of a top player and the various expert levels, and how the mind forms thought, how kids, these regular processes, but saying like it's not really a deep mystery. It could be broken down into discrete increments and measured. And so that's why chess is a popular game to cognitive psychologists. And generally, you know, saying my intention is not like, I don't care like who's going to be the best in the world. It's interesting. We have competitive coaching. And a lot of times I don't even necessarily encourage people to do competitive chess. If they want to, we help them and train them. And you see here from the expertise level, what does it take to be a top level thinker? In the chat earlier was talking about deep mind, and I still want to read through these papers, and even from the perspective of the machine learning, like the backward search and all these various methods that the computer used. I have all this stuff ready. I've actually had these Ask the Rabbis ready for a long time. I haven't done them. I hope to do those also. Sabbath is coming, COVID-19. So this game should be starting any second. Should have Cinnamon. Both these guys are streamers. They're not really talkers. Like both these guys have streamed in the past, but like if they stream, they usually just have a video of themselves playing. They don't actually talk much, or haven't developed this skill of banter, which is a different skill, and the certain aspects of the cognitive aspect of chess. What does it mean? You know, like are good chess players more intelligent? Is it just an aspect of memory? Do these guys understand something deeper, or is it a meta pattern level? Can you explain simple? These guys went through work and developed chunks and processes to understand the game at a deeper level. So when Cinnamon or Stubenfisch or Ray or Mindhunter look at the board, They see patterns at a deeper level, than me, who's still one of the top players of the game. And we're off. Okay, so here we go. Stubenfisch, Mindhunter. Still got my commentary. A little bit before Sabbath. Oops, sun's coming down. So Cinnamon straight into the rook shuffle, and it's expected. So as I said, the first series we had a black a4, like all the games but one. So the first move was a4. So Cinnamon today is the biggest propagator of the rook shuffle. I mean, the rook shuffle, he didn't come up with the rook shuffle. The rook shuffle existed before Cinnamon, but he's the biggest advancer of the rook shuffle strategy. He's done the most in terms of studying with the computer, playing it, teaching it, talking about it. And Stubenfisch is going for, I guess, a more recent strategy of the f6 strategy. The most common strategy is to break here on g6 because you don't have to sacrifice any pawn. And eventually the white squares lock up and you have to break through here on b6 and sacrifice a pawn. But here, the strategy to sacrifice f6 right away and not take it because it kind of bungles up black's own pieces. And so Mindhunter beat Ray in the classical white square strategy of g6, e6, c6, and then eventually b6. That's the most straightforward strategy because you don't have to sacrifice a pawn right away to do it. So he sacrificed a pawn f6 right away, and now Cinnamon is doing a h rook shuffle, and Cinnamon has also developed an h rook shuffle. I don't think it's quite as good as the a rook shuffle. It's unlikely he's going to use it in the World Championship. It's possible. Stubenfisch is a favorite here. You could see in the last few games. Stubenfisch's record here, 459.5 to 185.5. Even in their last game, Stubenfisch has won the last 7 games in a row. So Stubenfisch has beaten Cinnamon's rook shuffle with black. It would not be surprising if Stubenfisch decisively wins here with a huge victory. But Cinnamon, knew he was going to be playing Stubenfisch eventually, and probably let's see what he has prepared. So Stubenfisch first sacrifices pawns on the h file. If eventually Cinnamon's rook has to move back, he could push h4. At this point, as I said, like black needs to break through in one area, thin one area. The f6 not a novelty. He's asking if f6 is a novelty. It's relatively a novelty. It's been around for the last few months. Maybe Svenos has probably seen and looked at it much earlier. But yeah, f6 is relatively newer strategy. So I guess White Dancing Horse is also streaming commentary. These games are hard to give commentary on. I'm not a Twitch user, YouTube, and usually, like chess is a tough game. So chess players are hard people to get along with. So I don't know if this guy's from Norway. I mean, from Finland. So here you got some other commentary if people want to learn more. I don't know if this guy speaks English or German. I think. So I can't even tell if he's got some sort of commentary, but I'll put that in. I'm glad other people are streaming commentary. Let's get back to the game. So it's going pretty slow here. See they pushed f6. He brought the h rook back, allowing the push of the h pawn. And if he eventually brings the a rook back, he will do the same thing with the a file. So yeah, say like chess is not that popular. Only in the fantasy world, like Queen's Gambit. Like in the real world, there's more chess players than people watching. there's more streamers than chess fans. So that it's a nature of complications, and usually people are not going to be, that excited about things beyond their understanding level. So Liquid Horde claims that Cinnamon is better here. It's unclear to know the evaluation. Stubenfisch is a better on-the-board player, has more experience, 18,000 games here. Cinnamon has 13,000 games. Okay, so he makes a go for it, trades some pawns, sacrifices the knight. So we had f6 originally. The game started out with f6. And now the knight sacked again on f6. And the h file's been thinned down to 1 pawn, the e file to 2 pawns, and the a file to 2 pawns. It's unlikely. I mean, it's possible that Cinnamon could play like rook h6 and queen h8 and try to open up the h file and get the queens behind the pawns. That might be dangerous. And so even here, he could advance his pawns a few moves in the process and make it even to get a few more moves in. e6 could be coming very quickly. c6, and so he even sacrifices the rook, and it looks like it's interesting, all these pawns on the c file. What could he do? Does he, because if he pushes c6 here, it might thin the d file. He might be able to sack on d3, c4. So Stubenfisch, if he could prevent Cinnamon and keep on advancing his queenside pawns, he might as well. Maybe he could even get away with pushing e6 here. So he goes for c6 instead of e6, but e6 is coming very quickly also, and Cinnamon has not broken through. He doesn't really even have threats of breaking through, and now the king has reversed sides. I gotta say, like, I would assume this is Stubenfisch's game. Like, this looks extremely painful. I don't even really see a good threat of Cinnamon's. Like, he could kind of just slow play it here. Like c4, b4, and then d5, and you just play c4 and threaten b5. I don't even see a threat. I mean, he could threaten to take b3 at this point. He has to sacrifice his rook to b3, but his he just has no threats. His pawns are going to be able to advance, and his queen isn't going to be able to get behind the pawns to cause any threat. So now, even at this point, his queen still can't get behind the pawns. All of this, and he could just keep on advancing, keep pushing the queen back. He could even push f4, and so this is game over. Stubenfisch has almost certainly won this, but like, he has to actually finish it off. But I assume that that's over. So Cinnamon just resigns. Okay, so I'll put it on Stubenfisch board. So it would not be surprising if Stubenfisch almost completely annihilates Cinnamon, just wins like 6-0 or something like that. And that would not be surprising. Cinnamon goes for the a4, h4. So the top players are almost all exclusively using this a4, h4 strategy. And so it's interesting that Stubenfisch allowed the rook shuffle. He wasn't scared of the rook shuffle, and he pretty handily defeated the rook shuffle. So Cinnamon here, a4. So we had RayHolt. Mindhunter had a few different strategies, like the c6 and the white square holding strategy that Ray won a few games with, just pushing c6. And I've played Cinnamon in these holding square versions, and he's usually came out on top of me. But that's probably a likely strategy, just eventually maybe push c6 and create a light square holding strategy, or he could still attempt to open up the a file, to just take on b6. And Ray also tried that strategy. So this is more mirroring some of the games we saw in RayHolt versus Mindhunter. I'm not sure if we had this exact position, but these are common positions, and it's not been parried yet. So it's saying that Stubenfisch still has chances to break open the A file and for the basic Horde strategy of a breakthrough, getting the queen behind the pawns and running to an easy victory. Like that. That's what you're going for. So they got 9 viewers tuning in. Not much action in the chat. Not sure if there are chess or Horde players watching. But yeah, I'm just I wanted to catch the Horde World Championship. It's Sabbath. Sun is almost going down here, so I'm gonna end the stream like pretty soon. Maybe I'll get the full series in, especially Stubenfisch puts him away. So he could sacrifice the bishop. So that Stubenfisch has breakthrough potential still. The obvious is the possibility of the white bishop sacrificing on b5 for 2 pawns, but that may not have a follow-up at that point. The dark squares, the white pawns could be safe, that there may not be a direct follow-up. There may be no reason for Stubenfisch to go so quickly to sacrifice the bishop for those pawns. But it's unclear what else he has if he doesn't do that, if he's going to retreat the queen and push b6 and want Simonov to come to him. If he thinks he's better with his king on the queen side or the various issues, so he doesn't sack the bishop. Because you have to sacrifice the pieces in the same place of the board to break through. So just the sack of a piece for 2 pawns, it is not necessarily a good thing. It has to lead to a breakthrough. And if you sacrifice a piece for 2 pawn in completely different parts of the board, it won't help you. You have to do it in the same part of the board. So Stubenfisch just retreats and enters a holding strategy, kind of the dark square. So Mindhunter had went for the light strategy, and now Mindhunter has the dark square holding strategy. And you see these squares are going to cost, here will cost a pawn. Whether Cinnamon could advance, but these squares right here are very well defended, and Cinnamon eventually is going to have to push probably all of these pawns. Eventually, all of these pawns, these squares will hit. At this point, Stubenfisch could trade a piece for 2 pawns, and he's immediately still threatening b4. He could immediately do his bishop on b4. The d file has been thinned to 2 pawns. So if he plays c4 here, so Cinnamon, the obvious move here is c4 and just to hold on to the pawn. So he decides he can't hold on to the pawn and takes the opportunity to advance his d pawns 2 squares. And yeah, so Stubenfisch blocks the c pawn. It can't advance now. And so the holding strategy is still here. Like pushing here is really hard. He really only has 2 moves to push here or there. And it brings the white square bishop out, probe this weakness. He could bring the queen back here now and break through. So Stubenfisch has broken through. Now he sacrifices the pawn. Probably just takes the pawn. If he pushes the pawn there, the knight is hitting that pawn. The bishop here could immediately take, and he could get his queen behind the pawns. Stubenfisch decides better to just win the pawn, and the queen could even come back. At this point, he just won some pawns. In these type positions, pawns move really, really slow because, like, even if you have pawns on 3 files, in order to get across the king, it just takes like 5, 6, 7 moves for those pawns could make any threats. So like Sinamon is like 6 or 7 pawn moves away from like a serious threat, and Stubenfisch, basically coasting to an easy victory here. We'll see, does Stubenfisch play right into Cinamon's rook shuffle again? Is he not scared of Cinamon's rook shuffle? He's prepared for it, and that's what we're going to see. Right. Yeah, so no serious threats. Just sacrifice the rook. Probably just take on g2. However he does it. These pawns are tumbling. Cinnamon resigns. Okay, Stubenfisch plays right into the Cinnamon's rook shuffle again, and he goes for the f6 variation again. f6, d6. So weakness of the last move. f6 gets the pawn off d7, so he could push d6. d6, permanent weakness in the position. Cinnamon, I mean, this is definitely book and prep. Sacks the knight right away. Knight c6 just sacrifices the knight, and I'm assuming that this is no longer a rook shuffle type position. That Cinnamon sacrificing the knight there is not the rook shuffle move. It's obviously prep and determined that for whatever reason, that position that is opposed to shuffling the rook, he's better off giving up the knight right away. Or maybe he messed up. I'm not sure if the holding strategy. Obviously, the pawn on e5. Yeah, I'm not sure this looks good for Stubenfisch, so I'm not sure Cinnamon's his idea behind knight c6, why he did that. I mean, he might be some sort of bind here, but it doesn't even really look like a bind. It looks like Stubenfisch just has free passage to advance his pawns, and he's up material. So I'm not sure what Cinnamon did there. It looked like he's just down material, and he doesn't even have an aim for a breakthrough at this point. So he lost material. He doesn't even have a plan of what a breakthrough in return for the material. So we see Stubenfisch was well prepared for Cinnamon's rook shuffle, and it looks like Cinnamon messed it up, and this doesn't look good. I mean, he has some pressure. Maybe he has a holding strategy. Maybe Cinnamon had this position on the board before, and actually this is good for black. I don't know. This is the World Championship, so it would not be surprising if Cinnamon had this position on the board before the tournament and knows what to do here and thinks this is good for him. Yeah, but as I said, it looks like there's basically just free reign for Stubben for white to advance his pawns unhindered. That it doesn't even look like Cinnamon has a real holding strategy here. That that he even has squares that if Stubben advances to, he's in threat of losing something. Like it doesn't look good for black here. I'm not sure. I mean, Cinnamon is probably the biggest expert of the rook shuffle. F6 is a newer line. Maybe Cinnamon messed up his prep. Maybe he couldn't figure out good prep to beat the F6 line. But I'm going to assume something went wrong here. And it's looking really good for Stubben, but who knows? Like, the remote chance that, like, now he's just sacrificing his knight, and obviously he's going to get 2 pawns. Probably, I mean, I don't even know if he gets 2 pawns if he takes the knight, and then does he even get 2 pawns for it? And will he take the knight? You got to assume he's going to take the knight, and he could have. It was the idea to play bishop takes d6. And that's like a pretty crazy knight sacrifice. Like Cinnamon, he might have had ideas And it could be like with computer practice or his ideas that there were these knight c6 to knight f6 sacrifice ideas. They're essentially the right ideas, but they have to be played exactly correctly. And at this point, looks like both of them were just one knight for one pawn and didn't even create a real holding strategy that still Stubben could just keep on pushing through. And, so now there's a threat on c4 to sacrifice a bishop and a rook, and it still doesn't break through. Even the threat right now of rook takes c4 does not actually force a breakthrough. If he pushed f3, it prevents f3. Because say if he did f3 and then take that, the pawn on d2 would hang, so he doesn't do that. He just gives up the h pawn, and now he could push the g pawns if he wanted. Just g3. So he goes for f4 first. He could probably do e4, g3. I'm sure Stubben is more than likely to know how to win this easily. It's hard to imagine that these last second rook file attacks are worth anything. Maybe does he just play g5? Does he play g7? Even the rook, so he lost on time, but it wasn't looking good. Stubenfisch 3-0. So Stubenfisch plays the mainstream opening. Sinamon still, doing the technique blocking the A file. Stubben with a C6, open game. Just open up his the E, D, and C file, and let's see what he does. So Stubben is playing, open game. Just open up some pieces, and probably will wait to see what Sinamon does, to see what sort of strategy. Presumably he's going to enter some sort of holding strategy. If Sinamon takes a misstep, he could shift it to trying to open up the A file or some file. Definitely, I say Stubben's one of the, next to Svenos Mindhunter, a notch above. This Stubben and Mindhunter are a notch above Sinamon and Ray, and Svenos is a notch above Stubben and Mindhunter. So Stubben just playing open game, wait and see. With black here, he could do knight takes a5, or he could retreat. He could even try knight takes b4. So he had an open game, and he brings the knight back to e7. Which, interesting. Is he plan on retreating his pieces? He could win the pawn on a5 now if he wants. Does he push? So he pushes. I assume a6 is going to come. He doesn't need to play it right away. A6 can be played at any time. So Stubben has won a pawn. He might still have chances of penetrating on a file here. That is, even just bishop d7, a6. If he trades on a6, then even like king f8, queen e8, taking the pawn on a4. So Stubben has what to play for directly on the queen side. However, he doesn't do that. It might like a holding strategy here on he doesn't have pawns to block it, so it's not like he's going to win a pawn, but some sort of holding strategy that of these dark squares that eventually Sinamon is going to have to do something, and so presumably he's going to sack the bishop for the 2 pawns right away. Now he's thinned him down to 3 pawns on the E, D, and C file are all thinned down to 3 pawns. Presumably, at some point he will sacrifice a knight or bishop for 2 more pawns, and then 2 more pawns. So I say you need to sacrifice 3 pieces in the same section of the board. So now the likelihood that, yeah, he's going to wear him down to the center. And, now what's he do? He can't, if he pushes pawn here, this pawn hangs. If he pushes pawn here, then he could sacrifice on this square. So, the holding strategy remains with knights in a different way than Mindhunter had it up against RayHolt, because now you have a dark square knights. The knights are on dark squares and attack light squares in the interesting ways. And he just goes straight in. Cinnamon, probably a blunder, time pressure. He can't even take because then the pawn on c3 hangs. And so this is over. Stubborn, saying the thinning strategy and the two knights, time trouble. Cinnamon misses the pawn on c3, not defended. And now he's just down a substantial amount of material, basically for nothing. There's extremely small chances that, so Stubborn just sacrifices his rook to slow down the pawns, and it's over 4-0. So Stubborn, you're saying like he might win this 6-0. Will Cinnamon go for a rook shuffle again? Stubborn is not scared of Cinnamon's rook shuffle. The first game, Mindhunter played into RayHolt's. The only time Mindhunter didn't play a4, RayHolt played the rook shuffle and lost. Stubenfisch has allowed the rook shuffle. Cinnamon now has lost with it 2 times, and so goes for classical e6, trades with the f pawn, and so this is an advanced strategy that really differentiates like 2100 plus, like this basic idea, like of basically knight here, knight pawn here opens up the file. So you bring your knight to e7 or d7 to b or g6 with the pawn and to sack on e5. So a lot of times you get into this position with the knight here, and the expert move here is g6 or usually b6. And most players never play that. Like usually I win in those situations against average players who never even consider g6 or b6 there. But that's the computer recommended move. If you look in opening book, that's the move that these guys play. So it's interesting. He could have played f4 there, but he plays g4 first. The knight could take on d4. I mean, on e5. I'm sure Stubborn, this is definitely prep. Like saying this is definitely a position Stubborn has seen many times. Probably a position Cinnamon had in preparation. But presumably Cinnamon, didn't want to lose with the rook shuffle twice. So he's trying something different. The knight here, he just doesn't take it. And it's unclear if there's any threat. So d2, or, well, I mean, one thing Stubborn has to see, how does he make progress? Obviously he could push d6. So he just takes the knight. And, have to push d2. So Cinnamon's sacrifice of the knight there, honestly, I don't know. I didn't see it. So potentially f3 is a weakness. So it could be that his idea is, just bishop g7, somehow, I mean, he wants to sacrifice his rook on f3. He's got to get his queen behind his rook and sacrifice on f3. Or, holding strategy. So the rook on h6 could just be so that when Stubborn likely eventually has to push d6, he's going to sacrifice the bishop and use the rook. Stubborn goes a basic strategy of pushing the a pawn, and then instead of taking it back, using the weakness of the last move to push c3. And he still has to make progress. If he does b takes a6, he would more likely to take c6 than a6. But unsure. And also if the knight on a6, you can't, if you push b5, that leaves the weakness of c4. So if the knight gets here, then when so there's all interesting patterns that like you learn a few things that will benefit your regular chess from Horde. So does Cinnamon have a successful holding strategy here, or is Stubenfisch basically won here? I mean, he's like material-wise, Cinnamon only got a knight for a pawn. You're saying the king side is locked. I mean, interesting now because like rook here, if he pushes the pawn, then this pawn hangs. So it's an interesting defense strategy on Cinnamon's part. If he pushes c3, queen takes pawn, he could play rook here. So I thought he was going to play rook here right away, but instead if he played rook there, that looked like it would have been more forceful. So I'm not sure why Cinnamon went for the d file. Now it looks like, yeah, I mean, you could just sack the rook and break through. I don't know. Cinnamon might be Cinnamon's game here. So, if he just queen takes f3 or something like that. So Cinnamon at that point thought it was more important to prevent the advance of the d pawn than the kingside pawns. So a king could stop two files. Yeah, so Stubben just resigns. So Cinnamon, decides not to go for the rook shuffle, go for generic black opening. I'm not sure if that was his prep, but the knight f5, that knight sacrifice worked, and he had a holding strategy that was able to eventually result in victory. So this is relatively a repeat of last time. Stubben playing just an open game. Last time he was able to thin out the center. He traded his center pawns, and last time he just Cinnamon kind of made just an error, missing the double knight attack and the weakness of the pawn on c3 last game, if people remember. But so we'll see what happens this time. Does he have a sacrifice here, or does he just retreat? I mean, bishop c7, bishop b8, or you could do a knight sacrifice on d5 or f5, or bishop takes f5, or could conceivably you just leave the bishop there. And so there's only move 8, a regular open game. So he goes with a knight. And I guess he's going to get, so 2 more pawns for 2 pieces. So the way this works out, now he's got 2 pawns for 2 pieces. Then he gets another pawn back. And I guess he could have sacked a third piece. So now Stubben has sacrificed 2 pieces for 3 pawns. It's likely he's going to get another pawn back here. Last time he thinned out the E, D, and C files. So this time he's likely to try to thin out the king side. And as I said, like, you could sacrifice pieces for pawns, piece for 2 pawns, but you have to do it in the same part of the board to create a breakthrough. You can't just stack. You can't just sack on different part of the board. So takes interesting combinations. So Stubenfisch still is relatively down the pawn, but now if he takes the pawn and bishop takes, probably bishop takes g5. Maybe he doesn't have to play that right away, but the obvious move is just bishop takes g4, queen takes, and the pawn on h4, and he might even have a breakthrough here. So I mean, just he doesn't have to take the pawn right away. If the queen does like knight takes queen and g3, Cinnamon down on time, would definitely say that Stubenfisch is likely much better here. I don't know a proper evaluation here. He may not have a breakthrough. Okay, the thinning, so he can't take in minimally. He could do knight h2 and then takes f1 and then take on g3. So and pawns move really slow. Like at this point, he's already behind the pawns. He could probably just do knight takes g3 right away. He didn't have to prep it because taking back. And you just take h1 and then f2, and those pawns are crumbling. Stubenfisch, the king and the rook and the open file. This is an easy victory. He just nabbed all those pawns with his knight. He could just push the a pawn. So simplest method here, just push the a pawn. Queen d3. He's got his king and the rooks behind the pawns. They're just too slow. Just push the h pawn for another queen. You could do queen takes the pawns. There's basically zero chance here for Cinnamon. But there's no reason to resign because the pawns are there, and even if he gets him to sack both rooks, I mean, whether he he's got to be a little bit careful here. Think about it. Yes, just queening, probably safe. He could do queen takes d5. Queen takes d5, and if pawn takes, then the other queen comes back and takes on a3. Looks pretty decisive. The rook sack. Take on d6 first. Cinnamon, he didn't want to lose. He knew he wasn't expected. He wasn't the expected favorite. He did a lot of study. This guy put a lot of work into it. He got a lot better. But no, at the end of the day, Stubben is substantially better, and so likely, maybe Stubben will win one more game and Cinnamon will just resign, or see what happens. So let's see. Cinnamon was losing with his rook shuffles, tried something different. Now, because he didn't do the rook shuffle, I'm not sure if he switched it up. And this time, so I thought personally that Stubben misplayed that when he played b4 and g4 in that order. That so he goes for a different strategy this time. Obviously, Cinnamon still has good chances of breaking through on the king side here. I'm not sure about how quickly these pawns advance or the best strategy. Is he going for e4 here? Is that does he want to go for an early e4? Does the pawn trade? Does he want to let him take on h3 and then push g3 and block it up like that? So there may or may not be a breakthrough possible here. Stubben's counterplay is slow. Like the queen side attack is slow. The b pawn, the bishop's already out. Any play like Stubben take like 5 or 6 moves. Like if you look at Stubben playing b6, he's got to play b5. He's got to push like all 6 of these pawns up like one move. It take like 6-7 moves, and even e4 to push d6. It was like e5, c5, and d6, and you probably want to push these pawns up behind it. So Stubben really needs to just slowly push all of these pawns forward, and it's questioned whether Cinnamon could do anything useful in the meantime. Does he have a breakthrough strategy here? And so Stubben, if he has a breakthrough strategy and his queenside attack is coming late, it's going to be possibly Cinnamon's game. If there is no breakthrough strategy and Stubben could safely spend 5 or 6 moves even 8 or 9 moves, just advancing all these pawns on the queen side, it'll be interesting. So, Stubben basically now just wants to advance all of these pawns up 2 or 3 squares and then eventually push on b6, d6, and or. So, same idea like we said last time, the sack on f3, pushing possible defense. So now if g5 and he tries to immediately push f4, he could probably sacrifice, whether pushing e5 is more the threat of d6. So here we go, f4, and presumably he's going to take that with his bishop, but he doesn't have to. If he takes on h3 with the pawn, presumably he's just going to push g3. So Cinnamon here, does he sack the bishop immediately on f4? He doesn't have to. And the fork here. So he did the pawn. So he has the immediate threat of the fork g3. Even here. So he takes. Stubben decides that the advanced h-pawn is worth a move. So he took the h-pawn. And now, as I said, like he didn't get a chance. Stubben did not get a chance to push all these pawns up. So b6 is really far away. It's not that far. He could play a4 and b6 right away. But if he could have pushed all these pawns up 1 or 2 first, that would have been preferable. He wasn't able to. Cinnamon on some study, I think, said if you could get your queen behind the pawns by a certain move, it's usually good. So this is, borderline competitive. Now you have that h-pawn being a menace. He can't take the pawn on c2. He has to immediately do something to address the h-pawn. He could take h1, but still, take h2. That h-pawn is still a menace. Can he take on c7 and then push d6? And you obviously taking on e5 is a threat. He could even still take on e4 right now. So because it defends h2. So they're still playing this. Like I think Cinnamon is definitely a favorite here, but with the extended e-pawn, like the e-pawn makes a difference here. Saying having that e-pawn makes a huge difference. If you didn't have the e-pawn, I would definitely say it's over. With the e-pawn, and now just the fact that he took that with the d-pawn and not the b-pawn because his pawns are so far behind. Eventually, you say b6. So I guess, a4, a5. I'm not. Stubben might have good chances here. Saying that it takes h3. So Cinnamon decides he's got to bring the queen back. He can't afford to try to nibble the pawns from behind, and works his king right into the corner. King could definitely stop. So eventually you're gonna have b6, and then c6 is gonna fall. The king is in the corner. Interesting strategy, giving up d3 like that. And I guess the idea was if he took it, then he would have been able to push c4 and d5. So he could even push b5. Pretty interesting here. I'm not sure, because it's pretty crazy still here. Can he put c4 and then a4? Does the rook sack? So almost definitely queen x d4. And then if he pushes a4, he probably has to sack the queen. So king goes back. He has to do the queen probably to e4, only move. Then c5 or a5 to defend the b pawn. So I don't know the assessment here. Honestly, it's a tough position. I honestly I don't know. I think Cinnamon is probably winning here, but I'm not sure. So he does that pawn. immediately, and I guess he had to take with the rook and then the queen, and if he does a3, okay, so Stubben won. He can't take it. So this is a game and match. Stubben wins. And I wasn't sure there at the end. I thought Sinamon maybe had it, but no, he'll get the second queen and the third one. And it's game. Sinamon wins the series. I mean, Stubben wins the 6-1. Ray came closer, possibly largely due to the mouse slip. It was 6-3. But really, if it wasn't the mouse slip, it would have been 7-2. Sinamon only gets one game off. This one was close. So it's interesting dynamic. I talk about expertise more when you look at the top players that, the number one, Svenos, is an extreme favorite over both Stubben and Mindhunter. And Mindhunter and Stubben are great favorites over Sinamon and RayHolt. These guys are like number 4 and 5 best in the world at the game. And these guys are a bunch of favorite over me. And there's players even, like gradations. The chess follows a normal curve that, Sinamon, who basically beat me close to every game, still loses almost every game to Stubben, who loses almost every game to Svenos. But it was like that's the normal curve at the far ends of expertise. And add a little bit of commentary, and Horde world champion Queen's Gambit, 60+ million people are watching a movie about regular people pretend to be chess players, but real chess, there's only a handful of people tune in. But I love this stuff. I'm going to keep on advancing my theories. Blessings to the players, put a lot of work into the game. Sinamon, a lot of improvement. Tough, Stubben knew it was going to be tough competition. RayHolt knew Mindhunter was going to be tough competition. The favorites won. Stubben versus Mindhunter. These guys have played each other a lot of times. It'll be close, and then we'll have the world champion. So looking forward to that. Sun's almost down here, so Shabbat Shalom. Going to sign off. Blessings to everybody in the whole world, and to all the Horde players. And we've got 11 people here. Okay, so okay, thanks for tuning in. Got to sun's going down. I got to sign off, but I want to encourage these variants. Duvid's a pretty eccentric guy, but chess is a pretty eccentric game. But I'll put it out there. I enjoy these games, and props to the players and all the time and effort. And I'm going to try to fit this in to my greater multiple truth hypothesis and study on cognition. So Shabbat Shalom, blessings.